Okay, some time ago I began an Avengers 4 fan fiction called Quantum Revenge, and uploaded the introduction in part 1. So, here is part 2. Five years have passed since Thanos snapped his gauntlet and wiped out half of life in the universe. After the snap, nations across the world went into economic turmoil and riots occurred sporadically. In the midst of the chaos throughout the world, a new villain has become a major threat, one whose success could cast the entire world into utter devastation and international collapse. It is with this specter of devastation that we find ourselves high up in the sky. Iron Man was soon flanked by a fleet of fighter jets tailing him. However, they did not attack him, merely followed him, as if he was leading an attack. "Alright, pilots, brace yourself," Stark said. "The Mandarin's forces are about to attack us momentarily." "Roger that, Stark," one pilot responded. Suddenly, the attack began. Jets that weren't hit ended up taking evasive maneuvers, and some took nosedives towards the ground. Iron Man himself broke off into 3 separate suits, 2 of which began making a nosedive, while the center suit ended up flying high up into the sky. Meanwhile, the surviving jets launched missiles at the ground, causing waves to travel throughout the land. The 2 Iron Man suits were hovering over these waves, as if to collect data. "Sir, the Mandarin's power grid has been located," said an automated female voice. "Friday, get me into position," Tony responded. With that, Iron Man began flying towards a mountain. "Sir," Friday said, "the grid's power core is buried deep within the mountain." How does he keep getting these power cores? Tony wondered as he lifted his arm and prepared to fire. Hopefully a Jericho bullet will do the trick. Tony watched as the mountain exploded, in a manner similar to the Jericho missile all those years ago. To think, Iron Man didn't even exist then, Tony thought. Tony watched as the 2 suits of armor flew over the mountain to survey the damage. "Core has been destroyed," Friday said. "Roger that," Tony said. "Nebs, your time to shine." We then cut to a Quinjet flying over the scene, including troop transports preparing to liberate a small village from the 10 Rings. As the Quinjet flew over the edge of the village, a woman jumped out and onto a 10 Rings gun deck. Quickly, she sliced up the 4 enemies within a second and began jumping from fortification to fortification. Meanwhile, soldiers began storming the village, engaging in combat with the defending terrorists. After a few minutes of combat, the blue-haired woman caught sight of a hooded figure observing from the distance. "Mr. Stark, I see him. Permission to engage?" Tony hesitated for a moment. However, he was determined to capture the Mandarin, and this seemed like a good opportunity to do so. If Nebula didn't engage him, the troops might prompt the Mandarin to retreat. "Permission granted," Tony said, as he flew towards the village Nebula was in. By the time Iron Man arrived on the scene, Nebula and the Mandarin were already engaged in a vicious sword fight. The Mandarin turned to Tony, raised his hand, and suddenly, Tony was back on Titan. It felt real to Iron Man, as a battle between Thanos and Spider-Man occurred before him. As he collected his senses, he rushed to engage Thanos, preparing to blast him to smithereens. Thanos dodged the blast. "Don't worry, Mr. Stark, I got it from here," Spider-Man said as he jumped towards the Mad Titan. As both heroes charged at the Mad Titan, Thanos turned to Tony and snapped his fingers. And when Tony looked again, it was not Thanos he was fighting, but Nebula. "Thanks for that," Tony said, realizing that the Mandarin tricked his mind again, even as he almost scored a blow against Nebula. Turning to the Mandarin, Iron Man growled. "Never show me that vision again," Stark said as he managed to blast the Mandarin back a few yards. Getting back up, the Mandarin raised his hand and Tony felt a surge of ice course through him, and he felt his movement slow down. "Evidently, you have an icing problem," the Mandarin snarled as troops appeared, ready to reinforce the heroes. "Evidently, my work here is done," he said as he snapped his fingers, and fires emerged throughout the village, even engulfing some of the troops. Tony watched in horror as the fires burned actual bodies and flew forward to attempt to extinguish them, even as he knew the Mandarin was teleporting himself away from the battle. Eventually, it was too much, and all Tony could do was watch in horror. We then cut to a New York City engulfed in darkness, illuminated by skyscraper lights. And then we cut to the woman who, after the decimation, was rescued and recruited by Wong. She was standing at the top of a low building, looking around, possibly admiring the view. She then floated up over the balcony and floated down to the ground. Walking around, the woman found an alley where a man and a younger woman were sitting down around a fire. "Come to join us?" the man asked. "Not initially," the magic woman answered, walking over to them. "What's your name?" the man asked. "Serena," the woman replied. "What brings you out here?" the man asked. "Nothing to do," Serena replied. "I just needed to get out," she clarified, suddenly noticing that the young woman appeared to have a prosthetic leg. "Have you always lived in the city?" "As long as I can remember," Serena replied. "I remember almost dying in a crash, and people turning to ash." "Ah," the man said, "the decimation. Wish I knew why that happened. Then we could know if and when it would happen again." "How did the decimation affect you?" Serena asked. "Well," the man said, "lost a couple family members, but what really sent us down a spiral was when an alien army came down over Stark's tower and shot my daughter's leg off." "I'm sorry to hear that," Serena muttered. "Don't be," the man said. "It's not like you were responsible." Serena wasn't sure why, but something about that statement made her feel extremely uncomfortable, enough that she couldn't stick around. Excusing herself, she said, "I have to go find a bathroom," and she left. Trying to calm down, Serena walked around the city for a time before stumbling across an outdoor theater. Hoping to calm her mind, she decided to watch the movie, even though it seemed to be deep in the middle, close to the end even. We then cut to the sanctum, where Serena entered through a portal that looked vastly different from the ones we usually see. Hers appeared to be bluish and lacked the sparks that traditional portals displayed. "Where were you this time?" said a disapproving voice, causing Serena to turn to see Wong standing there. "Watch the movie," Serena said. "Risking the likelihood that an attack on the sanctum could cause it to fall," Wong said. "You're practically the most powerful sorceress I've ever seen. You'd give Strange himself a run for his money. Chances are, you're the difference between an attack failing or succeeding." We then cut to a small scene where Steve Rogers is looking at a hologram in what is clearly a Wakandan house. Suddenly, the Black Widow walks in. "You should seriously get some sleep," Natasha said. "I just need one more breakthrough," Cap insisted. "You're more likely to help Stark with a fresh mind than one that is frying," Widow said. "I suppose," Steve said. "But every second we're not devoting against the Mandarin is a window he could use to attack the United States." "Maybe you can convince Thor to help out in these battles." "Thor is not leaving Asgard," Cap said. and after what I heard happened to them, I can't blame him. Well, the only other option I see in fighting the Mandarin is taking some time to freshen your mind. And that concludes part 2. What did you all think of the story so far? Do you think Avengers Endgame will play out somewhat like this? Will Endgame go in a completely different direction? Or somewhere in the middle? What do you think will happen in part 3? Please leave your thoughts in the comments section down below, and subscribe so that you're notified when part 3 is finally uploaded.